wind was a predator, a starving wolf of ice and air that clawed at Alara's threadbare coat, seeking the last vestiges of warmth from her body and the precious, fading heat of the child bundled against her chest. Each gust was a physical blow, a ghostly shove that sent her staggering through the blinding white chaos of the Dakota blizzard. The snow was no longer a collection of delicate flakes, but a solid, moving wall that erased the world, leaving only the biting cold and the shrill scream of the gale. Her son, Leo, just a year old, was a silent, heavy weight in her arms. His cries had long since faded into faint, shuddering whimpers, and now even those had ceased. A terror colder than the storm itself lanced through Alara's heart. Was he sleeping, or was he slipping away into that final, frozen quiet? She couldn't tell. Her own fingers were numb, useless clubs, and the thought of unwrapping his protective cocoon to check on him was to invite the wolf of the wind to feast upon them both. So she walked on, a prayer frozen on her lips, her steps a faltering rhythm against the symphony of the storm. The sun was a forgotten memory, a myth from another lifetime. There was only the white oblivion, above, below, and all around. Her world had shrunk to the next agonizing step, and the one after that. She was a ghost haunting her own demise. The man she fled, her husband in name and her keeper in truth, Bartholomew, would believe the wilderness had claimed her. A fitting end, he would think, for property that had dared to develop a will of its own. His face, handsome in a cruel, sharp way, swam in her vision, his voice a venomous whisper on the wind, reminding her of her place, of her worthlessness without him. He had taken her education, her spirit, her very name, and tried to whittle her down into a beautiful, placid doll for his mantelpiece. But he had underestimated the core of iron that tragedy had forged within her long before she had ever met him, and he had certainly underestimated the ferocious, primal love a mother has for her child. That love was the only ember left glowing in the frozen ruin of her body. It was for Leo that she had stolen away in the dead of night, with only a small satchel of food, and a heart full of desperate hope. That hope was now turning to ash. Her legs were leaden, her lungs burning with every razor-sharp breath. She stumbled over a half-buried log, the impact jarring through her exhausted frame, and fell to her knees in a deep drift. The snow rushed in, a cold, soft embrace that felt deceptively like surrender. It would be so easy to simply lie down, to let the white blanket cover them, to sleep. So easy. A profound weariness settled over her, a siren's song of peace in the heart of the tempest. She pulled the bundle containing her son tighter, trying to shield him with the last of her life, and bowed her head. The wind howled a final, triumphant roar, and as Alara's vision began to tunnel into darkness, a single, lucid thought pierced through the fog of her fatigue. He will grow up without a name, without a memory of his mother's face. This thought, this final, unbearable agony, was what kept a single flicker of her spirit alive as the great white curtain of the storm came down. She was not just a woman dying. She was a story being erased before it had ever truly been told. And in the vast, indifferent wilderness, there was no one left to read the pages. The cold was sinking into her bones now, a deep and final stillness. The wolf had found her. It was over. Have you ever felt so utterly lost, so completely abandoned, that the world itself seemed to rise up against you? This is a story for you. It is a story about a woman named Alara, who found herself at the very edge of existence, with nothing but the fading warmth of her child and a spirit that refused to be extinguished. It is a story about a man named Silas, who had locked himself away from the world, believing his heart to be as barren and frozen as the winter landscape around him. We ask ourselves, can a single act of compassion change the course of a life? Can a flicker of light in the deepest darkness guide two lost souls back to the land of the living? The world can be a harsh and unforgiving place, a frontier of jagged peaks and relentless storms, not just in the land we cross, but in the hidden territories of our own hearts. We build walls to keep the pain out. We seek isolation to nurse our wounds, and we tell ourselves that it is better to be alone than to ever risk feeling such profound loss again. We convince ourselves that our season for love, for family, for hope, has passed, and all that remains is the long, quiet winter of survival. But what if fate, in its infinite and mysterious wisdom, has other plans? What if the very storm that threatens to destroy us is the same force that drives us to a shelter we never knew existed? This is a tale of redemption, of a love that was not sought but found, a family that was not born of blood but forged in the crucible of a shared winter. It is a testament to the quiet strength that lies dormant in the most unassuming souls, and the unexpected courage of a protector who had forgotten he had anything left to protect. It is a reminder that the most profound journeys are not across miles of snow-swept prairie, but across the silent, guarded distance between two human hearts. So come, sit by the fire with us and listen. Listen to a story of how a dying ember, fanned by the gentle breath of kindness, can roar back into a life-giving flame. This is the story of Alara and Silas, and how in saving each other, they found the one thing they had both given up on, a reason to see the spring. It is a story to prove that no winter lasts forever, and that even in the most desolate of landscapes, hope can and will take root. Silas felt the blizzard in his bones, a familiar ache that resonated with the deep, abiding chill in his soul. 4 or 5 years since the fever had taken his Sarah and their little Lily, the silence of his remote cabin had been his only companion. The wind that shrieked around the eaves was just the world's echo of the emptiness within him. He had built this place with his own 2 hands, felling the timber, notching the logs, his heart full of dreams for the family that would fill its rooms with laughter. Now it was a fortress of solitude, a monument to his loss. The storm was a bad one, the kind that buried the world and reminded a man of his own insignificance. He stoked the fire, the crackling flames a stark contrast to the frozen stillness of his life. He was a man of routine, of quiet survival. He had no need for the world of men, with its empty chatter and painful memories. Here, there was only the land, honest and brutal, and the work that kept his mind from dwelling on the ghosts that haunted the cabin's corners. Then he heard it, or thought he did, a sound, thin and reedy, almost lost in the gale's roar. A cry. He stilled, every muscle tensed. It was nothing. A trick of the wind, a branch scraping against the roof. Animals cried out in the night. It was the way of things. He settled back into his chair, the worn leather groaning under his weight. But the sound had snagged on something inside him, a rusty hook of memory. The memory of another cry, a small, weak sound in the dead of night that had signaled the beginning of the end for his own family. A father's instinct, long buried, stirred in its grave. He couldn't shake it. The sound, whether real or imagined, was a summons. Cursing himself for a fool, he rose. To go out in this was suicide. The world was a churning vortex of white death. But the thought of someone out there, helpless, was a torment he could not bear. It was a betrayal of the man he had once been, the husband and father who would have moved heaven and earth to protect his own. With a grim sigh that seemed to pull up all the grief he kept locked away, he pulled on his heaviest buffalo coat, grabbed the old lantern, and took his rifle from the pegs by the door. The moment he opened it, the storm lunged inside, a blast of ice and fury that extinguished the lantern's flame and sent papers scattering from his small desk. He relit it, shielding it with his body, and stepped out into the tempest. The force of the wind nearly knocked him from his feet. Snow, sharp as sand, blasted his face. He could see no more than a few feet in front of him, the lantern's light a pathetic, fluttering sphere in an infinite abyss of white. He followed the ghost of the sound, a paternal compass needle quivering in his soul. For what felt like an eternity, he found nothing but snowdrifts and the skeletal shapes of wind-blasted pines. He was about to turn back, to admit the folly of his mission, when his light fell upon a dark shape half buried in a drift not 20 yards from his own fence line. It was a mound, a heap of frozen rags. His heart hammered against his ribs. He approached cautiously, rifle ready, his mind flashing with images of wounded bears or wolves. But as he drew closer, he saw the shape of a human shoulder, the curve of a head bowed in defeat. It was a woman, and clutched to her chest, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, was a small bundle. As he knelt, a tiny, frail whimper rose from the bundle, the very sound that had called him from his hearth. It was the sound of a life on the very precipice of being extinguished. He brushed the snow from the woman's face. She was young, her skin a deathly, translucent white, her lips blue. But she was breathing. Barely. A fierce, protective instinct he thought had died with his daughter roared to life within him. This was not a choice. It was a command from a part of himself he had long since disowned. With a grunt of effort, he scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than she looked, a fragile thing. He held her and the child close to his chest and turned his back to the wind, planting his feet and leaning into the gale that fought to tear them from his grasp. Each step back to the cabin was a battle, a war waged against the wilderness for the sake of these two strangers. He was no longer just Silas, the hermit. He was a protector once more. And as he finally kicked the cabin door shut, sealing out the storm, he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the silence he had so carefully cultivated for 5 years had just been irrevocably broken. Ilara woke to the scent of wood smoke and simmering broth. For a moment, she was suspended in a warm, disoriented haze, a place without memory or pain. Then the world rushed back in. The blizzard, the fall, the bone-deep certainty of her own death. Her eyes snapped open, wide with panic. Where was she? Where was Leo? Her head turned frantically, her body protesting with a groan of exhaustion. She was lying on a simple robe bed, covered by a thick patchwork quilt. A fire crackled merrily in a large stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow across the log walls of a small, one-room cabin. And sitting in a chair by the fire, his back to her, was a man. He was large, broad-shouldered, with a thick, dark beard and hair that hung past his collar. The sight of him sent a jolt of pure terror through her. She had escaped one cage, only to be trapped in another. Her hand flew to her chest, expecting to find the bundled weight of her son. He wasn't there. A choked cry escaped her lips. The man turned his head slowly. His face was weathered, carved by sun and sorrow, and his eyes, when they met hers, were not cruel or leering, but held a deep, profound sadness, a weariness that seemed to mirror her own. He said nothing. He simply nodded his head towards a small, crudely made cradle set near the hearth. Nestled inside, sleeping soundly under a soft rabbit-pelt blanket, was Leo. He was safe. He was warm. The relief was so overwhelming, so absolute, that it buckled her, and a torrent of silent tears streamed down her face. The man watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to the fire. He ladled some of the steaming broth from the pot, hanging over the flames, into a wooden bowl, and brought it to her bedside. He set it on a small stool, along with a cup of water and a piece of hard bread, and then retreated to his chair, without a word. The silence was thick, heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. This was his sanctuary, she realized, and she was an intruder. She ate the broth, the warmth spreading through her chilled limbs, life returning with every spoonful. She watched him. He moved with a quiet, deliberate economy, his large frame surprisingly graceful. He checked on the baby, his rough, calloused hand hovering over Leo's head for a moment with a strange, hesitant tenderness before he pulled it back as if burned. A routine began to form in the silent, isolated world of the cabin. The blizzard raged on for 3 more days, a relentless white prison. During that time, they barely spoke. There was no need. Their lives fell into a simple, unspoken rhythm. When she was strong enough to leave the bed, she took over the care of Leo, her heart swelling with gratitude every time she looked at his pink, healthy cheeks. She found a small stash of flour and salt and began to bake bread, the domestic task a comfort, a way to reclaim a small piece of normalcy. She mended a tear in his coat, her needle moving with a practiced skill from her former life. He, in turn, provided. Each morning he would venture out into the storm for short periods, returning with firewood or a snared rabbit. He kept the cabin warm and secure. They moved around each other like two planets held in a strange, silent orbit, their paths crossing at the hearth, at the table, over the cradle of the sleeping child. Leo became the bridge between their two solitudes. The baby, unafraid and innocent, would sometimes coo or gurgle, and Ilara would see the man, Silas, pause in his work, his head tilted, a flicker of something, pain, memory, longing, crossing his face before the stoic mask slammed back into place. One evening, as she rocked Leo by the fire, the baby reached out a tiny hand and grabbed one of the man's fingers as he passed by. Silas froze. He looked down at the small hand wrapped around his large, scarred finger, and his breath hitched. He did not pull away. For a long, silent moment, he just stood there, a statue of a man tethered to the living world by the grip of a child he did not know. In that moment, Ilara's fear of him vanished completely, replaced by a wave of compassion so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. This was not a monster. This was a man with a wound as deep and as raw as her own. The storm, which had been their jailer, became their confessor. Trapped within the four log walls, with the wind as their only witness, the silence that had defined their cohabitation began to fray at the edges. It started as most things between them did, with the baby. Leo had woken with a small cough, and a shadow of panic had crossed Ilara's face, a fear that was all too familiar to the silent man watching her. "He'll be fine," Silas had said, his voice rough from disuse. "The air is dry from the fire. A little steam will help." He'd placed a kettle of water closer to the flames, a simple act of practical kindness that felt like a seismic shift in their silent world. The words hung in the air, an invitation. Later that evening, as the fire danced and Leo slept peacefully, Ilara found the courage to ask the question that had been hovering on her lips for days. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you come out in the storm for us?" Silas stared into the flames for a long time, his jaw tight. The firelight carved deep lines into his face, revealing the geography of his grief. "I heard a cry," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly. I had to see." He didn't elaborate, but Ilara understood. He wasn't talking about Leo's cry. He was talking about a cry from his past. Seeing the opening, the small crack in the fortress of his solitude, she took a breath and began to speak. She told him her name. Then she told him of Bartholomew, of the gilded cage he had built for her in Boston, of his possessive pride that masqueraded as love. She spoke of his coldness, the way he treated her as a prized mare, beautiful and to be shown off, but without a mind or soul of her own. She told him of the moment she knew she had to leave, when Bartholomew, in a fit of rage over a misplaced book, had raised a hand to her for the first time, his eyes filled with a chilling sense of ownership. She had fled not just for her own life, but for the future of her son, so he would never know the shadow of such a man. As she spoke, she did not weep. Her voice was steady, a quiet testament to the resilience he had already sensed in her. When she finished, the cabin was silent once more, but it was a different kind of silence. It was filled with her story, with her truth. Silas absorbed it all, his expression unchanging, but a new light of understanding flickered in his sad eyes. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as an intruder or a burden, but as a fellow survivor. Then, he offered her a piece of his own brokenness in return. "I had a family," he began, the words sounding like stones being pulled from deep within the earth. "A wife, Sarah, and a daughter, Lily." He spoke their names as if they were fragile relics, easily broken. He told her how they had come west, full of hope, to build this very cabin. He spoke of the fever that had swept through in the fall, swift and merciless. He described, in short, terse sentences that barely contained universe of pain, how he had held his daughter as she took her last breath, how his wife had followed 2 days later, her hand in his. "This cabin was supposed to be our beginning," he said, his gaze lost in the past. "It became their tomb, and my prison." He fell silent, the weight of his confession settling between them. Ilara now understood the profound sadness that clung to him like a shroud. They were two sides of the same coin of grief. She was running from a life that had become a prison, and he was trapped in one of his own making. In that shared moment of vulnerability, the last wall between them crumbled. The air was charged with an unspoken empathy, a deep, resonant connection forged in the heart of their shared pain. The next day, Silas sat by the fire, whittling a small piece of pine. Ilara watched as, under his skilled hands, the wood transformed. A small, delicate bird, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight, emerged. He sanded it smooth with a piece of leather, his movements full of a gentle reverence. When it was done, he walked over to Leo's cradle and tied the wooden bird to a string, hanging it above the sleeping baby. It was the toy he had meant to carve for Lily. In giving it to Leo, he was not replacing his daughter, but honoring her memory by allowing a new life, a new hope, to take root in the barren soil of his heart. Ilara watched, her own heart aching with a feeling she couldn't name, a mixture of gratitude, sorrow, and a tender, burgeoning affection for this broken, honorable man. The world was reborn in blinding white and brilliant blue. After days of relentless fury, the blizzard had exhausted itself, leaving behind a landscape of pristine, sculpted snow that glittered under a newly triumphant sun. The beauty was breathtaking, but for Ilara, it was terrifying. The end of the storm was the end of their sanctuary. The silence outside the cabin was no longer a promise of safety, but a path for her past to find her. The fear that had receded into a dull ache now returned with a vengeance, sharp and insistent. She found herself watching the tree line, her body tense, starting at every snap of a branch or call of a bird. Silas noticed her anxiety. He said nothing, but his presence became more watchful, his movements more protective. The quiet domesticity of their forced confinement was replaced by a low, humming tension. They both knew their time in this isolated bubble was running out. The outside world arrived on the third day after the storm, in the form of a lone rider on a big roan horse. He was a stocky man with a drooping mustache and a silver star pinned to his thick coat. A lawman, or so he seemed. Ilara saw him first, a dark figure moving against the white expanse, and her heart leaped into her throat. She instinctively snatched Leo from his cradle and backed away from the single window, her body forming a shield around her son. Silas had seen him too. He moved to the door, his posture calm, but his eyes cold and hard as river stones. "Stay back," he murmured to her, his voice a low command. The rider reined in his horse a few yards from the cabin, his gaze taking in the curl of smoke from the chimney, the freshly cut, which stacked against the wall. "Howdy," the man called out, his voice a little too loud, a little too friendly. "Name's Deputy Wilkes. Just checking on folks after the big blow." Silas didn't open the door fully, standing in the threshold like a sentinel. "We managed," he said, his tone flat and unwelcoming. The deputy's eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the shadows behind Silas. "Just me out here," Silas added, answering the unspoken question. "Heard you might not be," the deputy countered, shifting in his saddle. "Got word from down in Redemption. Powerful man by the name of Bartholomew Crane is looking for his wife. Says she ran off with their child. Got it in his head she might have come up this way, looking to get lost in the mountains." Every word was a hammer blow against Ilara's fragile composure. She pressed herself against the cold log wall, her breath catching in her throat. "Ain't seen a soul," Silas said, his voice unwavering. "This storm would have taken anyone foolish enough to be out in it." Deputy Wilkes stroked his mustache, his eyes lingering on the cabin door. "Well, Mr. Crane is offering a mighty handsome reward for her return. $500. A man could do a lot with that kind of money." It wasn't a question, it was a temptation, a test. Silas's face remained a stony mask. "I'm not in need of his money." The deputy shrugged, a little too casually. "Just doing my due diligence. If you see a woman, slight build, dark hair, with a baby boy, you'll know where to find me." He gave a mock salute, wheeled his horse around, and rode off, leaving deep tracks in the pristine snow. The silence he left behind was heavier, more threatening than before. The world knew. Bartholomew was hunting her. Ilara felt the fragile piece of the last week shatter into 1,000 pieces. "I have to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He'll send more men. He'll find me. I can't put you in this danger." She started gathering her meager belongings, her movements frantic. Silas stepped inside and closed the door, his large frame blocking her path. He reached out and placed his hands gently on her shoulders, forcing her to stop, to look at him. His eyes were blazing with an intensity she had never seen before. "You are not leaving," he said, the words a low, unshakable vow. "He will not take you. He will not take the boy." "But he's a powerful man," she cried, the tears finally coming. "He'll destroy you for helping me." "Let him try," Silas said, his voice a low rumble of thunder. "This is my home. 4 or 5 years, it's been nothing but a place of ghosts. You and the boy have brought life back into it." He took a deep breath, the confession costing him. "I won't let him put out that light. I will not let him hurt you." It was a declaration, a promise. He was no longer just a man offering shelter from a storm. He was a man making a stand, drawing a line in the snow, and daring the world to cross it. And in his eyes, Alara saw not just protection, but the fierce, unwavering strength of a heart that had finally found something new to fight for. The days that followed the deputy's visit were draped in a heavy cloak of anticipation. The quiet, healing rhythm of the cabin was gone, replaced by the tense, focused energy of a fortress preparing for a siege. The air itself felt different, charged with the unspoken knowledge that a battle was coming. Silas became a different man. The quiet, grieving hermit retreated, and in his place emerged a figure of formidable competence, a man who understood the grim calculus of violence. Alara watched him, a knot of fear and awe tightening in her stomach. He spent hours cleaning his rifle and his revolver, the metallic clicks and oiled scrapes echoing the cold resolve in his eyes. He moved with a purpose she hadn't seen before, securing the cabin not just against the cold, but against an attack. He brought in the last of the chopped firewood, stacking it against the inside walls. He reinforced the door with a heavy wooden bar and fashioned thick shutters for the single glass window pane. The cabin, which had been a haven of warmth and light, was slowly transforming into a defensible redoubt. He was methodical, silent, his focus absolute. Yet, his actions were not those of a man eager for a fight, but of one grimly determined to protect what he now held dear. Amidst the preparations, he began to prepare her, too. He was not content to let her be a passive victim, a prize to be hidden away while men decided her fate. One afternoon, he pressed his own heavy revolver into her hands. It was cold and shockingly heavy. Her first instinct was to drop it, to recoil from its deadly purpose. "I don't know how," she stammered, her hands trembling. "You will learn," he said simply. He took her outside, into the blinding white snow that had become their battleground. He set up a tin can on a fence post and stood behind her, his large, warm hands guiding hers, showing her how to hold the weapon, how to brace her arms, how to aim down the long barrel. His proximity was overwhelming, his scent of pine smoke and winter air filling her senses. "Don't think about the noise," he instructed, his voice low and steady by her ear. "Think only of the target. Squeeze the trigger, don't pull it." The first shot was deafening, a violent explosion that made her flinch, the recoil jolting her arm. The bullet went wide, kicking up a puff of snow far from the can. But she didn't drop the gun. She took a deep breath, the cold air steadying her, and listened to his quiet corrections. They spent an hour like that, the gunshots echoing across the silent valley. Slowly, her trembling subsided, replaced by a cold, focused calm. She began to hit the can, first by luck, then with increasing consistency. With each successful shot, a piece of the fear that had ruled her for so long chipped away, replaced by something new, something hard and resilient. She was not just Bartholomew's runaway wife or a damsel in distress. She was a woman holding her own defense in her hands. That evening, as the last light of day painted the snow in hues of violet and rose, they sat in the shuttered cabin, the world outside sealed away. The tension was a living thing between them. He had done all he could. Now they could only wait. "When they come," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you will take Leo and go into the root cellar. The door is under the rug. You will not come out, no matter what you hear." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "That is not a request, Alara. It's an order." She met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. "I will protect my son," she said, "but I will not hide like a coward while you fight my battle." She looked at the revolver, now resting on the table between them. You taught me how to use this. Let me use it. Let me stand with you. A flicker of surprise, of profound respect, lit his eyes. He saw in her not the frightened woman he had pulled from the snow, but an equal, a partner forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. He nodded slowly. All right, he conceded. But you do exactly as I say. Your first duty is to the boy. In that moment, they were no longer just a man and a woman. They were a unified front, a family of two standing against the coming darkness, their shared purpose a bond stronger than any vow. The arrival was not subtle. It came with the sound of many horses, their hooves crunching on the frozen snow, and the loud, arrogant voice of a man who believed the world belonged to him. Ilara, I know you are in there, you foolish girl. Come out this instant. This nonsense has gone on long enough. Bartholomew, his voice, once capable of charming a Boston drawing room, was now stripped of all artifice, revealing the raw, possessive tyrant beneath. Silas stood by the shuttered window, peering through a small crack, his rifle held steady in his hands. Ilara was behind him, Leo held tight in a sling against her chest, the heavy revolver clutched in her hand. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but her hand was steady. She could see them through another gap in the logs. Bartholomew, dressed in an expensive, pristine coat that looked absurdly out of place in the wilderness, and four other men, rough-looking guns for hire, their faces hard and impatient. Old man, Bartholomew shouted, his gaze fixed on the cabin. I am Bartholomew Crane. The woman you are harboring is my wife. She is my property. Send her out, and I will be on my way. I might even forget to press charges for theft. Silas remained silent, his stillness a powerful counterpoint to Bartholomew's blustering rage. I have 5 men, you backwoods fool. Bartholomew's voice was rising, losing its composure. Do not test me. I will burn this hovel to the ground with you in it. She is not property. Silas's voice boomed from within the cabin, low and resonant as a thunderclap. And this is my land. You are not welcome here. Leave now. A ripple of uncertainty went through Bartholomew's hired men. This was not the simple retrieval they had been promised. Bartholomew's handsome face contorted in a mask of fury. You dare defy me? For her, he let out a short, incredulous laugh. She is nothing. A disobedient, ungrateful creature. I will have what is mine. He gave a sharp nod to his men. Take the door. The world exploded into violence. The first shot was not from the attackers, but from Silas. He fired through the window shutter, his aim precise. One of the men charging the door cried out and crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg. The others scattered, diving for the cover of the trees. The air was suddenly filled with the roar of gunfire as they returned fire, bullets thudding into the thick log walls of the cabin. Splinters flew, and the small space was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Silas moved with a deadly calm, firing, ducking, reloading, a grimly efficient engine of defense. He was a warrior in his element, defending his fortress, defending his newfound family. Ilara, her back pressed against the wall, her body shielding Leo, felt a strange calm settle over her. This was it, the final confrontation. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, burning anger. Anger at Bartholomew, at the years of quiet submission, at the assumption that she was a thing to be owned and retrieved. She watched Silas, saw the sweat on his brow, the grim set of his jaw, and a wave of fierce, protective love washed over her. He was fighting her battle, bleeding for her. A bullet smashed through the window, showering the room with glass, and ricocheting off the stone hearth. Silas grunted in pain, stumbling back, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. He staggered but raised his rifle again, his face pale. Silas, she cried out. In that moment Bartholomew, seeing his chance, made a desperate rush for the door, kicking it with all his might. The reinforced bar held, but the wood groaned, splintering under the assault. He was going to break through. He was going to get to them. Silas was wounded, trying to hold off the other men. And then she acted. The damsel was done being in distress. With Leo held tight, she moved to the side of the door, pressing herself flat against the wall. She raised the revolver with both hands, just as Silas had taught her. The door burst inward with a crash, and Bartholomew stumbled into the room, his face triumphant, his eyes wild. "There you are, my dear," he snarled, his gaze locking onto her. He started forward, his hand outstretched to grab her. He didn't see the gun until it was too late. He saw only the woman he thought he owned, and in her eyes, he saw not fear, but a cold, hard fire he had never seen before. She squeezed the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the small cabin. Bartholomew cried out, not in pain but in shock, as he staggered backward, clutching a shattered kneecap. He fell to the floor, his arrogance and power gone, replaced by the pathetic, writhing form of a wounded animal. The fighting outside stopped. The remaining men, seeing their employer brought down not by the grim frontiersman, but by the very woman they had come to capture, lost their nerve. They dragged their wounded companion and fled into the woods. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by Bartholomew's whimpering and the sound of Leo, who had finally started to cry. Ilara stood over her fallen husband, the gun still smoking in her hand, her body trembling not from fear, but from the raw, liberating power of her own actions. She had not just been saved. She had been her own savior. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of stark, quiet chaos. Silas, grimacing against the pain in his shoulder, moved swiftly. He disarmed the whimpering Bartholomew, his movements economical and devoid of any emotion but grim necessity. He used a length of rope to bind Bartholomew's hands securely, ignoring the man's pathetic threats and pleas. The power Bartholomew had wielded his entire life, the power of wealth and name, was useless here. It had dissolved into the dirt and sawdust of the cabin floor. Ilara, her own adrenaline beginning to fade, knelt to comfort Leo, her soothing whispers a stark contrast to the violence that had just transpired. She looked at Silas, at the dark blood seeping through his shirt, and her heart clenched. The roles that had been so clearly defined upon their meeting were now completely inverted. He, the stoic protector, was wounded, and she, the fragile survivor, was the one who had ended the fight. Once Bartholomew was secured, Silas tended to the hired gun he had shot outside, creating a crude but effective tourniquet for the man's leg. There would be no more killing. Justice would be handled by the law, not by him. He dragged the man inside, binding him as well, leaving the two of them trussed and helpless near the cold hearth. Then, his duty done, his strength finally gave out. He slumped into his chair, his face pale and beaded with sweat, his hand pressed tight against his bleeding shoulder. Ilara was at his side in an instant. "Let me see," she said, her voice soft but firm. Gently, she eased the torn, bloody fabric away from the wound. It was a deep graze, raw and bleeding freely, but the bullet had passed through. Relief washed over her. With a focus she didn't know she possessed, she went to work. She boiled water, found clean rags, and with the quiet, steady hands of a seasoned nurse, she cleaned and bandaged his wound. He watched her, his gaze full of a raw, unguarded emotion she had never seen before. He had seen her fear, her resilience, her quiet strength. But today he had seen her fire. He had seen the lioness protecting her cub, and in that moment, his respect had deepened into a profound, unshakable love. When she was finished, her hands lingered on his good shoulder. Their eyes met, and in the quiet of the cabin, with the vanquished threat lying defeated on the floor, the world seemed to shrink to the space between them. All the unspoken words, all the shared glances, all the quiet moments of connection, culminated in that one long look. He slowly raised his good hand, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It was the first time he had said her name with such tenderness, such reverence. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. And then he drew her forward, and their lips met for the first time. It was not a kiss of frantic passion, but of deep, resonant homecoming. It was a kiss of gratitude, of relief, of a shared future bought with courage and sacrifice. It was the silent, solemn sealing of a pact made in the heart of a winter storm. An hour later, as the first hints of dawn touched the sky, they sat together at the small table, a blanket wrapped around Silas's shoulders, a sleeping Leo in his cradle nearby. The cabin was a mess, the door broken, but it felt more like a home than ever before. It was no longer a prison of memory for him or a temporary shelter for her. It was their place, their beginning. A season turned. The deep, suffocating snows of winter melted under the persistent warmth of the spring sun, revealing the rich, dark earth beneath. The world, once a monochrome of white and gray, exploded into a vibrant tapestry of green and gold. The river, once frozen solid, now rushed with life-giving water. And, in the cabin on the hill, a new life was taking root. Ilara, her hair tied back, her face touched by the sun, knelt in a small patch of tilled earth beside the cabin. She was planting a garden, rows of beans, squash, and corn, seeds of hope tucked into the fertile soil. Her movements were sure and steady, her heart full of a peace she had never known. A short distance away, Leo, now a sturdy toddler with his father's serious eyes and his mother's gentle smile, took a few wobbly steps across the new grass before tumbling down with a happy gurgle. He looked up, his face beaming, and held his arms out, not towards his mother, but towards the tall, broad-shouldered man mending a fence line nearby. Silas dropped his tools and walked over, sweeping the boy up into his arms and lifting him high into the air. The sound of Leo's delighted laughter mingled with the song of the meadowlarks. Silas's own face, once a mask of grief, was transformed. The lines of sorrow had softened, and his eyes, when they looked at Ilara and the boy, shone with a quiet, profound joy. He walked over to her, Leo perched on his hip, and stood beside her, looking down at the small green shoots just beginning to break through the soil. He had delivered Bartholomew and his man to the authorities in the nearest town, his testimony and Ilara's ensuring that the cruel man would face justice for his many crimes. The reward money, which he had initially refused, he eventually accepted, using it to buy seeds, a milk cow, and legal title to the land that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was their land now. "It's a good start," he said, his voice a low, contented rumble. Ilara looked up at him, her hand shielding her eyes from the sun. "It's more than a start," she said, her voice full of emotion. "It's everything." He reached down with his free hand, and she took it, her smaller hand fitting perfectly in his. They stood there for a long moment, a family of three, silhouetted against the vast, promising expanse of the frontier. The cabin was no longer a monument to what was lost, but the heart of all they had found. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, replaced by the vibrant, hopeful pulse of a shared future, a future that stretched before them, as bright and as boundless as the western sky. And so, a story that began in the heart of a blizzard found its peaceful end in the warmth of the spring sun. A woman running from a life of fear found her courage. A man imprisoned by his own grief found his redemption. A child without a future found a family. They discovered a profound truth there, in that small cabin on the edge of the wilderness, that the greatest shelters are not built of logs and stone, but of trust, compassion, and love. Their journey reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying storms are the ones that lead us exactly where we need to be. It shows us that a broken heart is not a death sentence, but an opportunity for something new and beautiful to grow in the cracks. The human spirit, like the landscape they came to call home, is resilient. It can endure the harshest winters, the deepest snows, and still, when the time is right, it can blossom into life once more. So we ask you, what did you think of Ilara and Silas's incredible story of survival and love? Do you believe that even the deepest wounds can be healed by the power of a new beginning? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one, and your stories and reflections are what make this community so special. If their journey touched your heart, please show your support by giving this video a like and, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more inspirational stories of hope, courage, and the enduring power of the human heart. Thank you for joining us by the fire. Until next time, remember that no matter how dark the storm, there's always a flicker of light waiting to guide you home.